Russian literature is filled with some of the most brilliant minds in history, but behind their literary masterpieces lay a world of scandals, addictions, and self-destruction. These writers weren't just observers of human nature, they were deeply flawed, often consumed by their own vices. Today, we're diving into the untold, sometimes shocking stories of 10 legendary Russian writers, the stories you'd never learn in school. Welcome to Alternative Russia, the channel where I share honest insights about life, culture, and history in Russia. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Few writers have explored the depths of human suffering like Dostoevsky, but his insights didn't come from imagination alone. His own life was a tragic novel filled with addiction, loss, and moments of sheer terror. Dostoevsky was a gambling addict, not just an occasional risk-taker, but someone who lost everything multiple times. He would sit at the roulette tables for hours, completely entranced, throwing away his earnings and even pawning his wife's jewelry to keep playing. He was constantly in debt, fleeing from creditors and writing at a feverish pace just to survive. His novel, The Gambler, wasn't just fiction, it was an almost autobiographical confession of his inability to control himself. And then there was the moment that changed his life forever. In 1849, Dostoevsky was arrested for his involvement with a radical intellectual group. He was sentenced to death and taken to the execution site, where he stood in front of a firing squad. At the very last moment, a messenger arrived with a pardon from the Tsar. He wasn't going to die, but the trauma of that experience haunted him forever, shaping the themes of fate, redemption, and suffering that run through his greatest works. Anton Chekhov is remembered as a refined, intelligent man who captured the quiet tragedies of life in The Cherry Orchard and The Lady with the Dog. But beneath his polished image was a man with a very different attitude toward love, pleasure, and romance. In his youth, Chekhov was a frequent visitor to brothels and wrote openly about his experiences with prostitutes in letters to friends. Unlike his deeply emotional characters, he approached these encounters like a scientist, detached, analytical, almost as if he were studying human nature. His personal life was full of contradictions. Though he married actress Olga Knitber, he insisted on living apart for most of their marriage. While his plays and stories overflowed with deep empathy, his real-life relationships were distant and intellectualized. Was he a man of profound feeling, or was he simply observing emotions from a safe distance, even in his own life? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Pushkin is considered the father of Russian literature, but his personal life was far from the noble image painted in school textbooks. He was a gambler, a reckless duelist, and a man with a dangerous temper. He fought over 20 duels, often over women, and his final duel in 1837 with Georges d'Anthès was a result of his burning jealousy over rumors that his wife, Natalia Goncharova, was flirting with the French officer. But Pushkin himself was far from faithful. His love life was a whirlwind of affairs, scandals, and erotic poetry that was so explicit it was hidden for decades after his death. Pushkin also had a notorious gambling addiction. He lost massive amounts of money at card games, sometimes putting his manuscripts up as collateral. His debts were enormous, and even at the peak of his career, he was financially unstable. His end was as dramatic as his life, shot in the stomach during a duel. He spent his last days in agony, writing letters and making arrangements for his family before succumbing to his wounds at the age of 37. We think of Tolstoy as the wise old man who wrote War and Peace and Anna Karenina, but young Tolstoy was nothing like the moralist he later became. As a young man, he lived a wild and reckless life, indulging in drinking, gambling, and visits to brothels. He kept a detailed diary recording his every sexual encounter, some of which involved serfs on his family estate. He later forced his wife Sophia to read these confessions, an act that tormented her for years. But then came the transformation. In his later years, Tolstoy renounced his wealth, gave up meat and alcohol, and became obsessed with a form of radical Christian pacifism. He preached celibacy and the rejection of materialism, yet, ironically, he continued to struggle with his own desires. His marriage became a battlefield, and he eventually fled from his family, dying at a remote train station in the middle of winter, alone. Bulgakov, the genius behind The Master and Margarita, had a dark secret. He was addicted to morphine. As a young doctor, he was prescribed morphine to treat an allergic reaction. What started as medical necessity soon turned into dependency. His early novella, Morphine, gives a terrifyingly vivid account of a doctor's descent into addiction. And many believe it was based on his own experiences. Despite his struggles, Bulgakov continued to write, creating some of the most satirical and daring works of Soviet literature. Stalin himself was a fan, which likely saved Bulgakov from the fate of many of his contemporaries, but his health deteriorated and he died young, leaving behind one of the most mysterious and rebellious novels in Russian history. Yesenin was Russia's rock star poet, a wild, self-destructive genius who lived fast and died young. He was a notorious alcoholic, drinking himself into a stupor almost daily. His relationships were chaotic. He married the famous dancer Isadora Duncan, despite not speaking English, and their marriage was a storm of passion and misunderstandings. By the end of his life, his mental state was deteriorating. In 1925, at just 30 years old, he was found dead in a hotel room, having hanged himself. His last poem was written in his own blood, a haunting farewell to the world. These writers weren't just literary legends. They were gamblers, addicts, duelists, exiles, and revolutionaries. Their lives were just as dramatic, tragic, and chaotic as the stories they wrote. Some were crushed by their own demons, others by the ruthless systems they lived under. But one thing is certain, their dark secrets make their works even more fascinating. Which one shocked you the most? Let me know in the comments, and if you want a part 2 or more videos about Russian literature, tell me below. Today I'm behind the camera because I've been sick for a week, but I'll be back on screen soon. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. You can also support my work through Buy Me a Coffee, PayPal, and other platforms. Links are in the comments and video description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.